looking at how to derive the quadratic formula, and as such, how we can solve quadratic equations using it. So firstly, let's consider the general form of a quadratic equation. That is ax squared plus bx plus c equals 0. So what we want to do to derive the formula is use this equation and solve for x. And how we're going to do that is using completing the square. So as you know, to complete the square, the equation has to be monic. So the first thing we do is factorize the a out, which leaves x squared plus b on ax plus c on a, which obviously equals 0. Now we can divide both sides by a, and that will leave us with this equation. So when completing the square, we have to half square and add this term here. So x squared plus b on ax, halving it, we simply double the denominator, so b on 2a, and then of course to square it, we square both the numerator and the denominator. So we have b on 2a, and we square that, we get b squared on 4a squared, and then of course we have to subtract that, and we have the plus c on a here. So now this can simply be rewritten as the perfect square of the form x plus b on 2a squared. And of course, if you were to expand that, you would get these three terms here. And then of course, we've got the b squared on 4a squared and then plus c on a. What I'm going to do though is take both these terms to the right hand side. So we get this equal to b squared on 4a squared minus c on a. Now I'm just going to rewrite this side in a nicer form. So of course x plus b on 2a. To get a common denominator, we have to times this side, this c on a by 4a, which means we get b squared minus 4ac on 4a squared. Now we can see this is squared, so we just want to take the square root of both sides. And remember, because it's an equation, it is plus or minus. But note how it's 4a squared here. That is a perfect square, so that can simply be rewritten as 2a. So we get x plus b on... Now, we'll move it up here. So we get x plus b on 2a, oopsies, equals plus or minus the square root of b squared minus 4ac on 2a. I've simply rewritten 4a squared here as 2a. Now simply to get x on its own, we subtract b on 2a from both sides. So we get x equals minus b on 2a plus minus b squared minus 4ac all on 2a. Now we can see that they both have a common denominator. Simply we can merge the two together and we get x equals minus b plus or minus the square root of b squared minus 4ac all on 2a. And that's how you derive the quadratic formula. So now we're going to try and use this in a practical sense to solve quadratic equations. Okay, so the first equation we're going to solve is x squared plus 5x plus 6 equals 0. So remember that the quadratic equation is x equals minus b plus or minus b squared minus 4ac all on 2a. Just remember that this will work for every single quadratic equation with a real solution. So simply we substitute the coefficients of these values into this equation. So in this equation, b is simply the coefficient of x, which in this case is 5. C is the constant term here, and x squared is the coefficient of x squared, which is 1 in this case, is simply the value of a. And you substitute those in. So let's do that. Negative b, which is negative 5, plus or minus the square root of b squared, so 25, minus 4 times a, which is 1, times c, which is 6, on 2a, and a, of course, is 1, so 2 times 1. Now we simply simplify this, and we get x equals minus 5 plus or minus 25 minus 24 on 2, which equals minus 5 plus or minus square root of 1, which is just 1 over 2. And this will give us our two solutions for this quadratic equation, which in this case, we'll consider it minus 5 plus 1 on 2, and we'll also consider minus 5 minus 1 on 2. So if we do plus 1 on 2, minus 5 plus 1 is minus 4, and of course, if you divide by 2, you get minus 2. And as well as that, let's consider the minus aspect. Minus 5 minus 1 is minus 6. Divided by 2 is minus 3. So they're your two solutions. Okay, so now we have a harder example, but it's the same method. We'll simply sub in these coefficient values and the constant term into the quadratic formula. So let's go ahead and do that. So x, and remember minus b. B in this case is negative 17. So if it's minus b, that means it becomes 17. Plus or minus square root of b squared, which is simply 17 squared, minus 4 times a, which is the coefficient of x squared, which is 6, and c, which is the constant, which is 12. Oh, that's a little awkward. Never mind that. On 2a, which is 2 times 6. Now we just want to simplify this. We get x equals 17 plus or minus, gonna need a calculator, 289 minus 4 times 6 times 12, which is 288, all on 12. So let's simplify this. X equals 17 plus or minus the square root of 1 on 12. Obviously, the square root of 1 is just 1. And again, we're going to consider both cases where we add and subtract the 1. So if we add the 1, one possible value for x is 17 plus 1, which is 18, divided by 12. And if you want, you can simplify that to 1.5. And x also equals, we have to consider minusing 1. So 17 minus 1 is 16, divided by 12. And if you want to simplify that, you can do so, and that will give you 4 on 3. So these are your two values for x. Thank you.